"If one must go, let it be me," whispered the little girl, her small hands pushing her wounded mother behind her as the slave traders closed in. The Apache warrior said nothing, his dark eyes taking in the scene with the stillness of granite. Then he made a choice that would defy every law of the frontier, every boundary between two worlds at war, and every assumption about what drives a man to risk everything for strangers who shared nothing with him but suffering. This is the story of Talon, the last of his clan, and Maya, a child who taught him that some bonds transcend blood, that some fights are worth dying for, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is not standing alone, but choosing to stand together. Arizona Territory, 1878. The high desert stretched endlessly under a merciless sun, painted in shades of rust and gold that seemed to burn even in shadow. Saguaro cacti stood like ancient sentinels against an endless sky, their arms raised in permanent surrender to the heat that could kill a man in hours if he didn't respect its power. This was Apache country, or had been, before the cavalry came with their blue uniforms and broken promises. The railroad had carved its iron scar across the landscape 3 years prior, bringing with it a tide of fortune seekers, cattle barons, and opportunists who saw the vast wilderness as nothing more than resources waiting to be claimed. Towns sprouted like tumbleweeds along the rail line, crude collections of wooden buildings and canvas tents where men came to forget their pasts and remake themselves in a land that asked no questions about what you'd done back east. But the desert remembered everything. It remembered the Apache bands that had moved like shadows across these ridges for centuries, reading messages in wind patterns and animal tracks that white men couldn't even see. It remembered the sacred places where warriors had sought visions, the hidden springs that meant the difference between life and death, the ancient hunting grounds where children had learned the ways that kept their people alive in a landscape that suffered no fools. Most of those places were empty now. The great Apache chiefs had been forced onto reservations or hunted down like animals. Geronimo himself had surrendered 2 years ago, his legendary resistance finally broken by overwhelming numbers and dwindling options. The survivors lived on government land, dependent on rations and promises that came sporadically, if at all. The free bands were gone, scattered like seeds on a wind that no longer carried them home. Into this changed world moved new predators, men who saw opportunity in chaos and profit in human misery. The slave trade had never completely died, despite laws and proclamations from distant Washington. It had simply adapted, become more discreet, more brutal in its efficiency. Mexican cartels worked with corrupt officials and rogue cavalry units to capture Apache stragglers, displaced Mexican peasants, and anyone else whose disappearance wouldn't be noticed or investigated too closely. Talon stood motionless on the sandstone ridge, his lean frame silhouetted against the dawn sky like a figure carved from the desert itself. At 32, he carried himself with the fluid grace of a man who had learned to move without disturbing so much as a pebble, to become invisible when invisibility meant survival. His hair fell past his shoulders, black as midnight water, and his dark eyes held depths that seemed to reflect distances far beyond any horizon. He wore the clothes of his people, buckskin leggings adorned with beadwork his sister had made before the soldiers came, a cotton shirt traded from Mexican merchants in better times, and moccasins so well crafted they left tracks only an Apache could read. Around his neck hung a medicine bag containing sacred items he would never describe to any white man, and across his back lay a Winchester rifle that had once belonged to a cavalry officer who had underestimated Apache patience. Talon was the last of the Red Rock Band, the sole survivor of a massacre that had occurred 3 winters ago when his people had tried to leave the reservation to hunt in their traditional grounds. The cavalry had called it a training exercise. The newspapers had called it a successful action against hostile insurgents. Talon called it the day he learned that some wounds never heal. They only teach you how to carry pain without showing it. For 3 years, He had lived alone in the high places where eagles nested and white men feared to climb. He knew every canyon, every hidden spring, every cave that could shelter a man from storms or pursuit. He moved with the seasons like his ancestors had, following ancient patterns that connected him to something larger than his own survival. But he no longer sought visions or performed the ceremonies that required community. A man could not sing the songs meant for many voices. His isolation had become both sanctuary and prison. In the empty places, he could remember his sister's laughter, his father's stories, his mother's hands working intricate patterns into leather and cloth. But in the empty places, he also heard echoes of screaming that no amount of time or distance could silence. He had learned to live with ghosts, to find purpose in simply continuing to exist when existence itself was an act of defiance. That morning, like every morning for over 1,000 days, Talon had risen before dawn to greet the sun and ask the spirits what they required of him. The answer usually came in the form of silence, a vast quietude that meant simply endure. But this morning brought something different. This morning brought the sound of voices carried on the wind from the trading post 15 miles south. Voices that spoke of fear and desperation in a language he understood all too well. Brennan's trading post sat in a dusty depression between two mesa formations, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden corrals that served as neutral ground where different worlds intersected. Mexicans brought silver and leather goods north. Anglos brought manufactured items and whiskey south. Apache scouts brought information about movements in the high country, and everyone pretended not to notice the undercurrents of tension that could explode into violence with very little provocation. Talon had been watching the trading post since before sunrise, studying the unusual activity through field glasses he had taken from the same cavalry officer who had donated the Winchester. Too many horses in the corrals. Too many men wearing guns who didn't look like traders or travelers. And something else, something that made his skin crawl with familiar dread, the presence of chains, of steel restraints designed for human cargo. He moved closer, using drainage gullies and rock formations to mask his approach until he could hear individual voices. What he heard made his blood turn cold. Marcus Brennan, the post's owner, was arguing with a man whose accent marked him as being from the deep south, probably Texas or Louisiana. They were discussing prices, delivery schedules, and profit margins for a cargo that included women and children. The Mexican ones bring decent money in New Orleans, the stranger was saying. But Apache young ones, especially girls, they fetch premium prices from certain buyers who have specific interests. The trick is keeping them alive long enough to reach market without too much damage to the merchandise. Talon's grip tightened on his rifle. He had heard stories of such trade, rumors that moved through the Apache community like poison in a water source. Children who disappeared from reservation schools. Women who vanished while gathering traditional foods. Men who went hunting and never returned, their families told they had probably joined outlaw bands or drunk themselves to death in border towns. Through a gap in the adobe wall, Talon could see the human cargo the traders were discussing. 12 people, mostly women and children, chained together in the shade of a ramada. Their clothes marked them as refugees, probably Mexican peasants displaced by the endless revolutionary conflicts south of the border. But among them, Talon spotted something that made his chest tighten, a woman whose features and bearing identified her as Apache, and beside her, a small girl who could not have been more than 6 years old. The woman was clearly injured, one arm hanging at an unnatural angle, her face bearing the yellowed bruises of healing beatings. She sat very still, very straight, in the way Apache women did when they were gathering strength for whatever ordeal lay ahead. The little girl pressed close to her side, dark eyes darting between the traders and the armed guards, with the alertness of a young animal learning to recognize predators. Talon watched as one of the guards approached the chained group with a water bucket. The Apache woman tried to reach for the dipper with her good arm, but the guard jerked it away, laughing. "This one's been more trouble than she's worth," the guard said to his companion. "Tried to bite Rodriguez yesterday when he got too friendly. Maybe we should just sell the girl and leave the woman for the buzzards." What happened next burned itself into Talon's memory with the clarity of lightning illuminating a midnight landscape. The little girl, Maya, looked up at the guard with no trace of fear in her dark eyes and spoke in perfect English, her voice carrying a dignity that seemed impossible in someone so young. "If one must go, let it be me. My mother is hurt. She needs medicine and rest. I'm small, but I am strong. I can work. I can learn. Take me and let her heal." The guard laughed, a sound like gravel scraping against stone. "Listen to this little one bargain like she's got something to trade. What makes you think you get to choose anything, Apache spawn?" Maya stood up as much as the chains would allow, placing herself between the guard and her mother. "Because even little things can choose to be brave. Grandmother taught me that. She said choosing to be brave is the only power they cannot take from you." The guard's hand moved toward his gun. "Maybe it's time someone taught you different lessons about power, girl." That was when Talon made his choice. Not the careful, calculated decision of a survivor who had learned to weigh every risk against every possible gain. Not the strategic thinking of a warrior who understood that one man could not fight an army. This was something older, deeper, more fundamental than survival instincts or tactical considerations. This was the choice a man makes when he sees something sacred being profaned and realizes that some things matter more than his own continuing existence. Talon had 18 rounds in the Winchester and knew the location of every man in the trading post compound. He had 2 pistols taken from dead soldiers and enough explosives to level the main building if necessary. More importantly, he had 32 years of accumulated rage that had been waiting for a target worthy of its release. He also had something else, the remembered voice of his grandmother telling him that a warrior's greatest victory was not killing his enemies, but protecting those who could not protect themselves. The mathematics of the situation were simple and deadly. Talon could probably kill 8 or 9 of the 12 men before they brought him down. In the confusion, some of the captives might escape, but the woman was injured, and the child was small, and 15 miles of desert separated them from anything resembling safety. Even if they survived the immediate rescue, their chances of long-term survival were minimal, unless someone stayed with them. Unless someone chose to abandon the luxury of solitude and accept the burden of protecting 2 people who would depend on him completely. Unless someone decided that the pain of loss was worth risking if it meant the possibility of connection, of family, of something worth protecting besides his own bitter memories. Talon studied the compound layout one more time, checking angles of fire and escape routes. He thought of his sister, who had died believing that their people would survive because someone would always be willing to fight for what mattered. He thought of his father, who had taught him that a man's worth was measured not by what he accumulated, but by what he was willing to sacrifice for others. He thought of his mother, who had woven strength into every piece of clothing she made, as if she could clothe her family in protection itself. Then Talon began to move down the ridge toward the trading post. Toward a choice that would change everything. Toward 2 strangers who carried in their hearts the same fierce will to survive that had sustained his people through centuries of hardship and loss. He moved with the fluid silence of a predator approaching prey, but in his heart he carried the gentleness of a man who had just remembered what it meant to have something worth protecting. The sun climbed higher in the desert sky, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson, as if the land itself knew that this day would be written in blood and courage, that this day would mark the moment when 3 broken pieces of different worlds came together to form something stronger than any of them could have been alone. Talon moved down the rocky slope like water flowing over stone, each step calculated to disturb nothing, to create no sound that might alert the sentries posted around Brennan's compound. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting sharp shadows that he used as cover, his dark clothing blending with the natural contours of desert stone and scrub brush. 30 years of living in harmony with this harsh landscape had taught him patience. But the sight of Maya standing defiant in chains had ignited something in his chest that burned hotter than the Arizona sun. "Tot been sol, and stayed." He reached the first waypoint, a cluster of barrel cacti that provided concealment while he studied the compound's defenses more carefully. 12 armed men, as he had estimated, but their positioning revealed fatal flaws in their security. They were Eastern men, uncomfortable in the desert heat, more concerned with shade and comfort than proper surveillance. Their leader, the man with the Louisiana accent, had positioned most of his guards near the main building where they could drink and gamble, leaving only 2 sentries watching the captives. The Apache woman, Maya's mother, had not moved since the confrontation with the guard. She sat with her injured arm cradled against her body, but Talon could see the alertness in her posture, the way her eyes tracked every movement in the compound without appearing to watch anything at all. She was gathering information, preparing for possibilities, demonstrating the survival instincts that had kept Apache people alive in hostile territory for generations. She would be ready when the moment came. Maya remained pressed against her mother's side, but her small hands were busy with something Talon couldn't quite see. After several minutes of observation, he realized what she was doing, working at the pin that held one of the chain links together, using a small stone to gradually bend the metal. The child was attempting an escape on her own, displaying the kind of resourcefulness that reminded Talon painfully of his own sister at that age. The compound's layout worked both for and against a rescue attempt. The captives were held in the open ramada, easily visible from multiple positions, but also accessible from the arroyo that ran behind the trading post. The main building blocked sightlines from that direction, and the guards' casual attitude suggested they had grown overconfident during their stay at Brennan's supposedly neutral territory. Talon began to formulate a plan that would require perfect timing and considerable luck. Rather than attack immediately, Talon decided to destabilize his enemies first. He had learned from watching cavalry units that white men grew increasingly nervous when they couldn't see or understand their opposition. He began with subtle harassment, a shadow moving just at the edge of vision, the sound of displaced stones from empty ground, the sense of being watched by invisible eyes. The first sentry to notice anything unusual was a thin man with nervous hands who kept checking and rechecking his rifle. Talon allowed him to catch a glimpse of movement near the horse corral, then vanished before the man could be certain of what he had seen. Within minutes, the sentry was reporting possible Apache activity to his companions, his voice carrying the edge of fear that spreads like contagion among men who are far from home and surrounded by hostile territory. "You sure you saw something, Miller?" asked the guard captain, a heavy-set man whose uniform suggested former military service. "Could have been a coyote or a roadrunner. Desert plays tricks on city eyes. I know what I saw," Miller insisted, his rifle now pointed toward every shadow. "Something moved deliberate-like. Not natural. We got company out there, Captain, and it ain't friendly." Talon repeated the performance from different positions around the compound, each time allowing just enough visibility to confirm that someone was watching. Someone was moving, someone was planning. The psychological effect was exactly what he had hoped for. The guards began pulling back toward the main building, consolidating their positions and leaving the captives with lighter security. The Louisiana trader emerged from the building, clearly irritated by the disruption to his schedule. "What's all this commotion about Indians? Thought you boys were supposed to be professionals, not jump at every desert sound like greenhorn tourists." "Sir, we got definite signs of Apache surveillance," the captain reported. "It could be scouts for a larger force. Might be we should move the cargo before what? Before some lone buck gets curious about our operation?" The trader's voice carried the kind of arrogance that Talon had learned to recognize in white men who believed their superior numbers made them invulnerable. One Apache against 12 armed men? I like those odds just fine. Talon's opening move came not with violence, but with precision. He had identified the compound's weak point, the water source, a hand-dug well that supplied both the trading post and any travelers who stopped there. In desert country, controlling water meant controlling everything else. Using techniques learned from his grandfather, Talon contaminated the well with a mixture of plants that would cause severe stomach distress without permanent harm. The effects began to manifest within 2 hours. Men who had drunk from the well started experiencing cramping and nausea, forcing them to seek relief in the trading post's primitive facilities. By midday, half the guards were incapacitated, leaving the compound's security severely compromised. The trader's arrogance began to crack as he realized his professional gunmen had been reduced to groaning invalids by an invisible enemy. "This is Apache work," Marcus Brennan told the trader, his face pale with worry. "They know every plant, every root, every poison in this desert. Whoever's out there, he's not just watching. He's preparing to move against us." The trader's response revealed both his desperation and his complete misunderstanding of Apache tactical thinking. "Then we force him into the open. Take one of the captives outside the compound, make some noise. If he wants to play hero, let him try it when we can see him coming." It was exactly the mistake Talon had been hoping for. The traders selected Maya, apparently believing that threatening a child would provoke an emotional, poorly planned rescue attempt. They dragged her 50 yards from the compound, chained her to a scrub oak tree, and positioned 2 guards nearby with rifles ready. But they had made a critical error in their understanding of Apache warfare. Talon did not react emotionally to the obvious trap. Instead, he used it as an opportunity to separate his enemies and engage them on ground of his choosing. As the guards focused their attention on the surrounding terrain, waiting for an Apache charge that would never come, Talon was already moving into position behind them. The first guard died without making a sound, Talon's knife finding the precise spot between vertebrae that would sever the spinal cord instantly. The second guard realized something was wrong only when his companion's rifle clattered to the ground. But by then, Talon was already moving, closing the distance with fluid grace. A hand over the mouth, pressure applied to the carotid artery, and the second guard joined his partner in unconsciousness without raising an alarm. Maya watched these events with the composure of someone far older than her 6 years. When Talon appeared beside her, she showed no fear, only relief and a kind of recognition that transcended their different backgrounds. "I knew someone would come," she whispered as he worked at her chains with tools taken from the unconscious guards. "Mother said the spirits always send help to those who don't give up." Freeing Maya had been the easy part. Getting her back to her mother and then escaping with an injured woman would require different tactics entirely. The remaining guards in the compound had realized something was wrong when their sentries failed to respond to signals, and they were now in full defensive mode, weapons trained on every approach to the Ramada where the other captives waited. Talon studied the situation with the careful analysis of a predator choosing the perfect moment to strike. The guards had made another tactical error by clustering together for mutual protection, leaving several areas of the compound undefended. More importantly, their fear had made them predictable. They would shoot at anything that moved, making stealth impossible, but also creating opportunities for misdirection. "Can you run?" Talon asked Maya, testing the circulation in her newly freed hands and feet. "Fast as a rabbit," she replied, unconsciously echoing something her grandmother had once told her about escaping danger. "When I give the signal, you run straight to that pile of saddles near the corral. Stay low, stay quiet, and wait for me there. Can you do that?" Maya nodded, her dark eyes bright with understanding and determination. Talon felt a surge of respect for this small person who faced danger with such composure. She reminded him not just of his sister, but of all the Apache children who had learned to be brave because their survival depended on it. Talon's diversionary attack began with fire. Using materials scavenged from around the compound, He created several small blazes in strategic locations: hay bales near the stable, canvas covers on supply wagons, wooden fence posts that had been soaked in years of desert sun and would burn quickly and dramatically. The smoke and flames would confuse his enemies while providing cover for movement. The psychological effect was immediate and profound. The remaining guards, already nervous from their companion's mysterious fate, interpreted the fires as evidence of a coordinated Apache attack. They began shooting at shadows, at smoke, at anything that might conceal an enemy warrior. Their panic worked perfectly for Talon's purposes, masking the sounds of his actual approach to the Ramada, where Maya's mother waited. "Hey, Cecile." The Apache woman looked up as Talon materialized beside her like a figure stepping out of the desert itself. She showed no surprise, only gratitude and readiness. "My daughter?" she asked in Spanish, the language they shared despite their different tribal backgrounds. "Safe," Talon replied in the same language, his hands already working at her chains. "But we must move quickly." "Can you travel with that arm?" She tested the injured limb, her face showing pain but not defeat. "I can do what is necessary. My name is Elena. My daughter calls herself Maya now, but her Apache name is Morning Star. She has been waiting for a warrior to find us." The escape from Brennan's trading post became a running battle that showcased both Talon's tactical brilliance and the extraordinary courage of his charges. Elena moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to covering ground quickly, despite injury, while Maya demonstrated the endurance that came from a childhood spent learning that sometimes survival meant running until your lungs burned and your legs trembled. Talon had cached supplies and weapons at predetermined points along their escape route, a network of hidden resources that stretched across 15 miles of desert terrain. The first cache contained water, food, and medical supplies, allowing him to treat Elena's injured arm properly, while Maya kept watch with the intensity of a trained scout. Her small size and sharp eyes made her an ideal sentry. She could hide in places where adults couldn't fit and see approaching danger from angles that taller people would miss. The pursuit began 2 hours after their escape, when the remaining guards had finally organized themselves enough to follow the trail. But Talon had anticipated this, leading his charges along a route that would exhaust horses and confuse riders unfamiliar with desert navigation. He used every trick his people had developed over centuries of avoiding cavalry patrols, false trails, water caches that would draw pursuers away from the real route, and terrain features that would slow mounted men while allowing people on foot to move quickly. By sunset, they had covered 12 miles and gained a significant lead on their pursuers. More importantly, they had reached territory that Talon knew intimately, country where he could disappear with 2 companions as easily as a single Apache warrior had once vanished into empty air. As they climbed toward the hidden canyon that would be their temporary sanctuary, Maya looked back at the vast desert spreading below them and spoke words that would echo in Talon's heart for years to come. "Thank you for taking both of us," she said simply. "Grandmother always said that family isn't just the people you're born with. Sometimes it's the people who choose to stay when staying is dangerous." Elena looked at Talon with eyes that held depths of gratitude and understanding. "She is right. You could have taken just one of us or neither, but you chose to accept the greater burden, the greater risk. That is the choice of a true warrior, of a man who understands what makes life worth preserving." As the stars emerged in the clear desert sky, Talon realized that his long exile from human connection was ending. These 2 people, strangers who had become family in the space of a single day, had reminded him that survival was not the highest goal a man could pursue. Sometimes the greatest victory was not staying alive. Sometimes it was choosing to live. The hidden canyon that Talon led them to defied everything Elena and Maya thought they knew about the Arizona desert. Where the surrounding landscape burned under relentless sun and supported only the hardiest vegetation, this secret valley bloomed like an emerald jewel hidden in a setting of rust-colored stone. Ancient cottonwoods lined a clear stream that bubbled up from underground springs. their leaves whispering secrets in a dozen different languages, carried on evening breezes. Cliff walls rose 300 feet on all sides, their surfaces decorated with pictographs that told stories, stretching back centuries before white men had ever dreamed of crossing the great waters. Handprints, hunting scenes, spiral symbols representing the journey of souls, all painted in ochre and charcoal by artists whose names were forgotten but whose visions remained, as vivid as the day they had climbed these walls to leave their mark on eternity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This place is sacred, Elena whispered as they descended the narrow trail that switched back down the canyon wall. Her injured arm was bound in a sling Talon had improvised from strips of his own shirt, but the pain seemed forgotten as she took in the impossible beauty surrounding them. I can feel it in the stones, in the water, in the very air we breathe. Maya ran ahead despite her exhaustion, her child's spirit revived by the magic of discovery. She had spent months in captivity, weeks on the trail with slave traders, and now found herself in a place that seemed constructed from the fairy tales her grandmother had told her during long winter nights. She knelt beside the stream and cupped the crystal-clear water in her small hands, laughing as tiny fish darted between her fingers. Talon watched them explore with emotions he had not experienced in 3 years. The canyon had been his most closely guarded secret, a place where he came when the weight of solitude became too heavy to bear alone. No white man had ever seen this valley. It was invisible from above, accessible only through a crack in the cliff face that appeared to be nothing more than another shadow among thousands. Even other Apache knew of it only through whispered legends, but now he was sharing it, and the sharing transformed the place itself. Where once he had seen only memories of what was lost, he now saw possibilities for what might be built. The ancient pictographs seemed brighter somehow, as if the presence of other human souls had awakened sleeping spirits. The stream sang more clearly, and the wind carried scents of hope mixed with sage and cedar smoke. Elena's injured arm required more attention than field treatment could provide. The bone had been cracked, not broken completely, but weeks of neglect and abuse had allowed infection to begin its insidious work. Talon examined the wound with hands that had learned healing from his grandmother, a medicine woman whose knowledge had saved countless lives before the soldiers came. "The bone will mend," he told Elena as he gathered plants from the canyon's abundant pharmacy. "But the poison in your blood must be drawn out first, or healing will be incomplete." He showed Maya how to identify the plants they needed: purple coneflower for infection, willow bark for pain, devil's claw for inflammation. The child learned, with the focused intensity of someone who understood that knowledge meant survival, her quick mind absorbing not just the appearance of each plant, but its growing habits, preparation methods, and the stories that helped remember its properties. "Grandmother taught me some of these," Maya said, holding up a sprig of yerba buena. "She said plants were the first teachers, that they showed our people how to live in harmony with the earth instead of fighting against it." Elena watched her daughter learn from Talon with a mixture of gratitude and wonder. In captivity, Maya had been forced to hide her intelligence, to appear docile and unremarkable to avoid attracting dangerous attention. Now freed to explore and question and discover, the child's true nature emerged like a desert flower after rain, bright, resilient and beautiful beyond imagination. The healing ceremony that followed drew on traditions older than memory. Talon prepared a sweat lodge using stones heated in a sacred fire, aromatic plants that released their medicine in steam, and prayers spoken in the Apache language that connected the present moment to generations of ancestors who had faced similar challenges. Elena participated despite her injury, understanding instinctively that healing involved more than repairing damaged tissue. As the purifying heat drew infection from Elena's arm and exhaustion from their spirits, something deeper began to mend as well. Three people who had been broken by loss, separated by circumstances beyond their control, and forced to survive alone, began to discover what it meant to be part of something larger than individual struggle. Trust grew in the sacred space between them, trust that would be tested but never broken. The days that followed established rhythms that felt as natural as breathing. Talon taught Maya to read the subtle signs that announced weather changes hours before clouds appeared, the way spider webs collected moisture when rain was coming, how birds altered their flight patterns before storms, the sound wind made when it carried different kinds of weather across the desert's vast expanses. Elena, despite her healing arm, insisted on contributing to their small community. She knew skills that complemented Talon's, how to weave baskets strong enough to carry water, how to prepare foods that would keep for long journeys, how to create dyes from desert plants that could be used for both decoration and camouflage. Her knowledge came from a different tribal tradition, but meshed perfectly with Apache ways. "My people were traders," she explained as she worked clay from the stream bank into pottery. "We traveled between the mountains and the sea, carrying goods and stories from one group to another. I learned something from every people we visited. Navajo weaving techniques, Hopi pottery methods, Comanche horse medicine, Mexican metalworking. Maya absorbed these lessons like desert earth absorbing rain. She learned to make fire without matches, to track animals by reading disturbed sand and bent grass, to find water by watching the behavior of insects and birds. More importantly, she learned the stories that gave meaning to survival techniques, why certain plants were gathered at specific times, how ceremonies connected human beings to the natural world, what responsibilities came with knowledge. But the most profound education was happening on a level deeper than practical skills. Maya was learning what it meant to be part of a family where love was demonstrated through teaching, where protection came not from walls or weapons, but from shared knowledge and mutual care. She watched Talon and Elena work together, saw how they anticipated each other's needs, how they created safety through cooperation rather than dominance. Talon found himself changing in ways he had not expected. 3 years of solitude had taught him self-reliance, but had also made him forget the joy of sharing discoveries, the satisfaction of watching someone else master a difficult skill, the simple pleasure of conversation around an evening fire. Eleanor's quiet wisdom and Maya's boundless curiosity reminded him that survival was not the highest goal. Thriving was. One evening, as they sat around their fire watching stars emerge in the clear desert sky, Maya asked the question that had been growing in all their hearts: "Are we a family now?" Elena looked at Talon across the flames, seeing in his eyes the same mixture of hope and uncertainty that filled her own heart. They were three people thrown together by desperate circumstances, united by shared danger and mutual dependence. But families were built on choice as much as chance, on commitment that extended beyond immediate need. Their peaceful existence was interrupted on the seventh day by a visitor who appeared like smoke, materializing into human form. An elderly Apache man emerged from the canyon's concealed entrance, moving with the careful steps of someone whose body had been worn down by decades of hardship, but whose spirit remained unbroken. He wore traditional clothing decorated with symbols that marked him as a medicine man, a keeper of the old ways. "Grandfather," Talon said in Apache, using the respectful term for an elder regardless of blood relationship. "How did you find this place?" The old man smiled, his weathered face creasing into patterns that suggested vast amusement at some cosmic joke only he understood. "I'm Joseph Crowfeather. The spirits told me to seek the warrior who protects the mother and child, the one who has chosen family over solitude. They said I would find him in the valley where water sings to stone." Joseph's presence transformed their small group in unexpected ways. He brought news from the outside world. The slave traders had given up their pursuit after 3 days, convinced that Talon had led his charges into the deep desert where they would die of thirst. The territorial government was facing pressure from Washington to crack down on human trafficking, making Brennan's operation too dangerous to continue. Most importantly, he brought an offer that none of them had anticipated. "There is a place," Joseph said as they shared the evening meal. 3 days' travel to the north, in country so rough that white men avoid it entirely. A group of families, Apache, Mexican, some white people, who have chosen to live outside their own society's rules. They farm hidden valleys, raise horses and cattle, trade with anyone who comes in peace. He paused to sip tea brewed from desert sage, letting his words settle like seeds in fertile ground. They could use a warrior with Talon's skills, a woman with Elena's knowledge of traditional crafts, a child quick enough to learn the new ways they are creating. It is not the old life, but it is not surrender either. It is something different, something that honors the past while building toward a future. Elena's eyes brightened with possibility. Mixed families. Apache and Mexican living together? And others, Joseph confirmed. A few white families who lost everything in the war and came west to start over. Some freed slaves who kept traveling after emancipation because they wanted to find a place where color of skin mattered less than character of heart. People who believed that survival means cooperation, not conquest. Maya looked between the adults, sensing undercurrents she could not quite understand, but knowing instinctively that important decisions were being made. "Would we all go together?" she asked. "Would we still be a family?" Joseph Crowfeather studied the three of them with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of worlds, that had witnessed the destruction of one way of life and the desperate struggle to create another. "That depends," he said finally, "on whether you have truly chosen each other, or whether you are still three separate people sharing temporary shelter from the storm." The question hung in the night air like smoke from their fire, demanding an answer that would shape not just their immediate future, but the very definition of who they were becoming. Talon looked at Elena, saw in her dark eyes the same mixture of hope and fear that churned in his own chest. Maya watched them both, this child who had already demonstrated wisdom beyond her years, waiting to see whether the adults would choose courage or safety. "I have been alone for 3 years, Talon said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of careful consideration. "I thought that was what the spirits wanted from me, to survive, to remember, to carry the stories of my people forward in solitude. But perhaps I misunderstood. Perhaps the greatest act of remembrance is not preserving the past unchanged, but helping it grow into something new." Elena reached across the fire to touch his hand, her fingers still bearing the calluses of captivity, but warm with life and possibility. "My grandmother used to say that the strongest trees are the ones that learn to bend without breaking, that grow new branches when old ones are damaged by storms. Maybe this is our chance to grow something new." Maya smiled, an expression of pure joy that seemed to light the canyon walls themselves. "Then we're really a family, not just until the danger passes, but for always." As if in response to her words, the night wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain from distant mountains, promising that even in the desert, new life was always possible for those willing to wait for the right season and brave enough to send down roots in difficult ground. Dawn broke over the hidden canyon with colors that seemed painted by spirits celebrating new beginnings. Crimson and gold light cascaded down the ancient cliff walls, illuminating pictographs that appeared to dance in the shifting shadows. The stream sang its eternal song, but today it seemed to carry notes of farewell mixed with blessing, as if the sacred place itself understood that its current guardians were ready to seek their destiny elsewhere. Elena stood at the edge of the water, her healed arm now strong enough to help with the packing. The past 2 weeks had transformed her from a broken captive into someone who radiated quiet confidence and purpose. She wore clothing Talon had crafted for the journey, buckskin pants that would protect her legs from thorns and rocks, a cotton blouse dyed with colors that would blend with the desert landscape, and moccasins designed for long-distance travel over rough terrain. The transformation in Elena went deeper than physical healing. Her movements carried the assured grace of someone who had rediscovered her own strength. Her voice held the authority of a woman who would never again allow herself to be reduced to mere property. During their time in the canyon, she had shared stories of her people's traditions, teaching Maya songs and ceremonies that connected them to generations of strong women who had survived everything the harsh world could deliver. Maya moved through their temporary camp like a small whirlwind of efficiency, her child's body containing energy that seemed limitless. She had grown visibly stronger during their time in the canyon, her face fuller from regular meals, and her movements more confident from constant learning and exploration. The fear that had shadowed her eyes during captivity had been replaced by bright curiosity and an unshakable faith in the family that had formed around her. But Maya's growth extended far beyond physical recovery. She had become the bridge between her mother's Mexican heritage and Talon's Apache traditions, absorbing knowledge from both cultures with the enthusiasm of someone young enough to see connections rather than differences. She could now track animals using Apache methods while preparing traditional Mexican foods, could read weather signs and cloud formations while singing lullabies in Spanish that her grandmother had taught her. Talon checked and rechecked their supplies with the methodical care of someone who understood that forgotten essentials could mean death in the wilderness. Water containers made from sealed gourds, dried meat and pemmican that would provide nutrition for days, medicinal plants carefully preserved and wrapped, tools and weapons maintained to perfection. But the most important cargo they carried was intangible: hope, trust, and the shared determination to build something meaningful together. The weapons cache Talon had assembled represented more than simple preparation for danger. Each knife had been sharpened to razor perfection, each arrow fletched with precision that would ensure accuracy at distances that could mean the difference between hunting success and starvation. His rifle bore the careful maintenance of someone who understood that mechanical failure at the wrong moment could doom everyone depending on his protection. Joseph Crow Feather watched their preparations with approval, his ancient eyes seeing beyond the physical act of packing to the spiritual significance of their choice. "The spirits smile on this journey," he told them as they prepared to leave the canyon. "You go not as refugees fleeing danger, but as a family seeking their proper place in the world. There is great difference between running from something and walking towards something." The old medicine man had spent the previous evening in ceremony, burning sage and sweetgrass while chanting prayers that would protect travelers and ensure safe passage through hostile territory. His weathered hands had drawn symbols in the sand that represented their journey, not just the physical movement across dangerous landscape, but the spiritual transformation that would complete their evolution from 3 separate survivors into a unified family. As they climbed the narrow trail that led out of the canyon, each of them paused at the top to look back at the sanctuary that had sheltered their transformation from strangers into family. The pictographs on the walls seemed to glow in the morning light, ancient blessings for travelers setting out on paths that would change not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone they would meet. The journey north to the mixed community led through some of the most challenging terrain in the Arizona territory. Joseph had warned them that the route was deliberately difficult. The people they sought had chosen isolation as protection from a world that often showed little tolerance for those who lived outside conventional boundaries. Only travelers with serious intentions and considerable skill would complete the 3-day trek through landscape that could kill the unprepared. The first day tested their physical conditioning and their ability to work as a coordinated team. They traveled through a maze of narrow canyons where flash floods had carved twisted passages through solid rock, creating a labyrinth that could trap unwary travelers for days. Talon led with the steady pace of someone accustomed to covering ground efficiently, while Elena and Maya followed in single file, each learning to read the subtle signs that marked safe passage. The canyon system they navigated had been carved by thousands of years of seasonal flooding, creating a network of passages that appeared to lead in every direction but actually followed patterns that only experienced desert travelers could decipher. Walls of red sandstone rose hundreds of feet above them, their surfaces polished smooth by wind and water, their overhangs creating pools of shadow that provided blessed relief from the climbing sun. Maya proved herself invaluable as a scout, her small size allowing her to explore passages that adults could not enter, her sharp eyes spotting landmarks and dangers that others might miss. When they encountered a section where recent rockfall had blocked their intended route, it was Maya who discovered an alternate path through a cave system that emerged exactly where they needed to be. The cave network Maya had found revealed traces of ancient occupation, pictographs that showed hunting scenes and ceremonial gatherings, fire-blackened stones that had once supported cooking vessels, fragments of pottery that spoke of people who had used these passages for shelter across countless generations. Talon explained to Maya and Elena that they were walking through a corridor that had been used by their people's ancestors for over 1,000 years. "You have the gift of finding hidden ways," Elena told her daughter as they rested in the shade of a towering boulder. "Grandmother always said that some people are born with the ability to see doors that are invisible to others." Elena's words carried deeper meaning than simple praise for her daughter's scouting abilities. During their weeks together, she had watched Maya demonstrate an intuitive understanding of the natural world that went beyond mere intelligence. The child seemed to sense things, approaching weather changes, the presence of animals, safe paths through difficult terrain, with accuracy that suggested gifts inherited from generations of people who had survived by reading signs that others could not see. The second day brought different challenges, crossing open desert where the sun's heat could overwhelm anyone who did not understand the rhythms of desert travel. They moved during the cool hours before dawn and after sunset, resting during the brutal midday heat in whatever shade they could find. This was Elena's chance to demonstrate skills learned during her people's trading journeys, her knowledge of desert survival techniques proving equal to Talon's Apache training. She showed them how to extract moisture from certain cacti without triggering the plant's defensive mechanisms, how to read the subtle color changes in sand that indicated underground water, how to use reflective surfaces to signal across vast distances without alerting hostile observers. These were skills that could mean the difference between life and death in the unforgiving landscape they were crossing. The techniques Elena demonstrated had been passed down through generations of traders who had crossed impossible distances carrying precious goods between distant peoples. She knew which insects could be eaten safely, which plant roots contained water during drought seasons, how to preserve meat using salt deposits found in dried lake beds. Her knowledge complemented Talon's hunting and tracking skills perfectly, creating a survival capability that was greater than the sum of its parts. But the most significant test came on the second night, when they encountered other travelers who were not friendly. A group of 5 white men, heavily armed and carrying supplies that suggested they were planning an extended stay in Apache country, had made camp near the only reliable water source for 20 miles in any direction. Their leader, a man with colonel's insignia on his dusty uniform, challenged Talon's right to approach the spring. "That's close enough, Apache," the colonel called out, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm. "This water source is under military protection. You and your squaw and kid need to find somewhere else to drink." Talon stopped exactly where he was, his own hands carefully visible and empty, but his posture suggesting readiness for sudden movement. Behind him, Elena and Maya waited with the stillness of people who had learned to recognize danger and respond accordingly. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste, metallic and sharp, like the moments before lightning strikes. The soldiers' camp revealed more about their mission than their leader probably intended. Survey equipment, detailed maps and supplies that suggested they were preparing for an extended mapping expedition. But there were other items too, shackles and chains that spoke of different intentions. weapons in quantities that exceeded what would be needed for simple protection, and correspondence bearing the seal of territorial officials, known for their involvement in questionable enterprises. "The spring belongs to no one man," Talon replied in English that carried only the slightest trace of accent. "It has provided water for travelers since before your grandfathers crossed the great water. There is enough for all who approach in peace." The colonel's eyes narrowed as he studied Talon more carefully, taking in the quality of his weapons, the confident way he carried himself, the obvious intelligence in his dark eyes. This was not the submissive reservation Indian he had expected to encounter, not the broken savage his experience had taught him to anticipate. This man radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from absolute self-confidence and complete comfort with violence if violence became necessary. "You speak pretty good English for a savage. Where'd you learn that? Government school? Mission?" "I learned it from my enemies," Talon said simply. "It seemed wise to understand the words of those who wished to destroy my people." One of the colonel's men, a sergeant with nervous eyes and shaking hands, stepped forward with his rifle partially raised. The man's agitation was obvious, sweat stains on his uniform despite the cool evening air, trembling fingers that suggested either fear or withdrawal from alcohol, eyes that darted constantly between Talon and the surrounding terrain as if expecting attack from every shadow. "Colonel, this buck's probably one of them renegades we've been tracking. Maybe we should what, Sergeant?" Elena's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. She stepped out from behind Talon, moving with the grace of someone absolutely unafraid, her dark eyes fixed on the nervous soldier. "Should you threaten a woman and child who have done you no harm? Is that the honor your uniform represents?" The sergeant's rifle wavered as he found himself facing not a submissive Indian woman, but someone who radiated quiet authority and zero tolerance for intimidation. Elena continued speaking, her voice carrying the cadence of educated speech that confused men who had expected broken English and fearful submission. Elena's intervention revealed strategic thinking that went beyond simple courage. By stepping forward and speaking with obvious education and dignity, she forced the soldiers to confront their assumptions about who they were dealing with. These were not desperate refugees who could be easily intimidated, not ignorant savages who would cower before superior firepower. This was a family unit that operated with confidence and mutual support, that faced danger without panic or submission. "We are peaceful travelers seeking water that belongs to all living things. If you wish to share the spring like civilized human beings, we welcome your company. If you wish to claim ownership of what cannot be owned, then you reveal yourselves as something less than the men your mothers raised you to be." Maya stepped forward as well, her small hand slipping into Talon's larger one, her young voice adding unexpected weight to their position. The sight of a child showing no fear in the face of armed men created cognitive dissonance that further undermined the soldiers' assumptions about the situation they thought they controlled. "My grandmother taught me that water is sacred, that it should never be used as a weapon against thirsty people. She said anyone who would deny water to children has forgotten what it means to be human." The words came from a 6-year-old child, but they carried the accumulated wisdom of generations, the moral authority that transcends age and circumstance. Maya's grandmother had indeed taught her that water was sacred, but she had also taught her that speaking truth in the face of power was the greatest form of courage, that even small voices could shame grown men into remembering their better selves. The standoff lasted several long minutes, with 5 armed men facing a single Apache warrior, a Mexican woman and a 6-year-old child. On the surface, the odds appeared overwhelming in the soldiers' favor, but something in the calm confidence of Talon's family group, their obvious lack of fear despite being outnumbered, began to work on the minds of men who had expected easy intimidation. The colonel was the first to recognize that he was facing something outside his experience. These were not refugees or renegades or any of the categories his military training had prepared him to handle. They were a family unit operating with the kind of quiet assurance that came from absolute trust in each other and complete comfort with their environment. Colonel William Morrison had served on the frontier for 12 years, had participated in campaigns against Apache bands, had seen the worst that conflict between cultures could produce. But he had also learned to recognize certain qualities in his opponents: courage, dignity, the kind of strength that could not be broken by force. What he saw in this unlikely family reminded him of the best soldiers he had ever served with, regardless of their uniform or their cause. "Stand down, Sergeant," the colonel ordered finally. "There's room at the spring for everyone." What followed was one of those unexpected moments of human connection that sometimes emerge from conflict. As both groups shared the precious water, conversation began cautiously but gradually warmed into something approaching friendship. The soldiers were part of a surveying expedition, mapping territory for future railroad development. They had been in the field for weeks and were genuinely curious about the people who called this harsh landscape home. The conversation that developed around the shared spring revealed the complex realities facing both groups. The soldiers were not simply representatives of an oppressive system. They were individuals trying to make sense of their role in a changing world. Men who had signed up to serve their country, but found themselves caught between competing visions of what that service should mean. Elena found herself answering questions about desert survival, sharing knowledge that could save these men's lives if they encountered real emergencies. She explained how to identify edible plants, how to find water in apparently barren terrain, how to read weather signs that could provide crucial warning of dangerous storms. Her willingness to share potentially life-saving information with men who had initially threatened her family demonstrated the kind of generosity that transcends immediate self-interest. Maya demonstrated her ability to find hidden water sources and edible plants, earning amazed respect from soldiers who had been surviving on hardtack and canned goods. She showed them how to locate underground streams by watching the behavior of insects, how to identify which cacti could provide emergency food, how to predict flash floods by reading cloud formations over distant mountains. Even Talon contributed, providing information about weather patterns and safe travel routes. His knowledge came from a lifetime of moving through country that could kill unprepared travelers, from generations of accumulated wisdom about how to survive in a landscape that showed no mercy to those who failed to respect its power. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. The colonel, whose prejudices were being challenged by everything he observed, finally asked the question that had been bothering him since the confrontation began. "You folks don't fit any pattern I've seen out here. You're not reservation Indians, not Mexican peasants, not white settlers. What exactly are you?" "We are family," Maya answered with the simple honesty of childhood. "We chose each other when no one else would choose us. Talon saved us, but we saved him too. Now we're going to find a place where families like ours can live in peace." Morrison studied the three of them for a long moment, seeing something that challenged his assumptions about race, culture, and the possibility of cooperation in a territory he had been taught to view as fundamentally hostile. "And where might that be?" "North," Elena said simply. "There are people building something new up there, something that makes room for different kinds of families, different ways of living together." As the evening progressed around the shared campfire, an extraordinary thing happened. The soldiers began sharing their own stories, tales of displacement and loss that echoed themes familiar to Talon's family. Morrison had lost his farm to debt collectors after the war. Sergeant Collins had watched his brother die in a senseless fight over water rights. Private Williams had left Georgia because staying meant choosing between his white father and his Cherokee mother. The stories that emerged revealed the common threads of human experience that transcended cultural and racial boundaries. Each person around the fire had been shaped by loss, by displacement, by the challenge of surviving in a world that often seemed designed to break the human spirit. But they had also been shaped by resilience, by the refusal to surrender hope, despite overwhelming evidence that hope was foolish. Maybe we're not so different, Morrison mused, as they watched stars emerge in the clear desert sky. All of us trying to find a place where we can build something better than what we left behind. When they parted company the next morning, the exchange was friendly rather than hostile. Morrison provided them with a detailed map of the territory ahead, marking water sources and potential hazards. In return, Talon shared information about Apache trail markers that could help the surveying expedition avoid dangerous areas. The map Morrison shared contained more than simple geographical information. It included notes about the political situation in various territories, warnings about corrupt officials who might prey on travelers, recommendations for trading posts where fair treatment could be expected. This was intelligence that could mean the difference between successful travel and disaster. "If you ever make it back to civilization," Morrison told them as they prepared to continue north, "tell people what you're trying to build up there. Some of us in the army are getting tired of fighting wars that don't seem to accomplish anything except making more enemies." Maya hugged each of the soldiers goodbye, her innocent affection breaking down barriers that adult diplomacy might never have breached. As they watched Talon's family disappear into the morning heat shimmer, the soldiers carried with them a different understanding of what was possible in the changing landscape of the American West. The final day of their journey took them through country that seemed designed by nature as a fortress for those seeking isolation. Towering mesas created natural barriers that could only be crossed at specific points, while hidden valleys provided sanctuary for anyone willing to work the challenging terrain. As they climbed the final ridge that would reveal their destination, all three travelers felt the weight of anticipation mixed with uncertainty. What they saw below them exceeded every hope they had dared to nurture during their long journey. The valley that spread before them was green with cultivation, dotted with buildings that combined architectural traditions from different cultures, alive with the sight of children playing while adults worked together on projects that clearly required cooperation across racial and cultural lines. "It's real," Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "A place where different kinds of people actually live together in peace." Maya pointed excitedly toward a group of children near the valley floor. "Look, Mama. Some of them look like me, and some look like Talon, and some look like those soldiers we met. They're all playing the same games." Talon stood silent for a long moment, taking in the sight of something he had never quite believed possible, a community where Apache skills and Mexican traditions and white technology had been woven together into something entirely new, something that honored the past while embracing the future. As they began their descent into the valley that would become their new home, each of them carried the knowledge that they had not just survived their individual tragedies, they had transformed them into the foundation for something better than any of them could have built alone. The valley settlement that sprawled below them defied every assumption about what was possible in the fractured landscape of 1878 Arizona territory. Adobe buildings with red tile roofs stood beside log cabins and canvas-covered wagons that had been converted into permanent homes. Gardens bloomed with vegetables that represented a dozen different cultural traditions. Corn, beans and squash growing beside tomatoes and peppers. Herbs from Mexico mingling with wild plants that Apache women had cultivated for generations. Children ran between the buildings, with the easy familiarity of those who had never known racial boundaries as barriers to friendship. A boy with distinctly Apache features chased a Mexican girl, while a blonde child followed behind them, all three laughing at some shared joke that needed no translation. Their clothing reflected the same cultural mixing, traditional Apache moccasins on feet that also wore Mexican-style cotton pants, Spanish shawls over shoulders that also bore Anglo-style blouses. Adults moved through the settlement with purposeful activity that spoke of a community that had found ways to make cooperation profitable as well as idealistic. At the central well, women from different backgrounds worked side by side, drawing water and sharing news, their conversations flowing seamlessly between Spanish, English, and Apache dialects. Near the corrals, men collaborated on horse training, using techniques that combined Apache horsemanship with Mexican vaquero skills and Anglo breeding knowledge. As Talon, Elena, and Maya descended the final slope into this impossible community, they were met by a delegation that seemed designed to represent every element of the settlement's diversity. Leading the group was a woman whose weathered face and confident bearing marked her as someone accustomed to authority, her mixed Apache and Mexican heritage evident in features that carried strength from both traditions. "Welcome to Esperanza Valley," the woman said in Spanish, then repeated the greeting in English and Apache. "I am Rosa Delgado, and these are my neighbors. We have been expecting you since Joseph Crowfeather sent word of your coming." Behind Rosa stood a collection of individuals whose very presence challenged conventional ideas about frontier communities. An elderly white man with the bearing of a former military officer, his arm resting protectively around the shoulders of an Apache woman young enough to be his daughter. A freed slave whose impressive physical presence was softened by gentle eyes that suggested a man who had learned compassion through suffering. A Mexican vaquero whose scarred hands spoke of hard work and whose smile suggested someone who had found contentment after long searching. Maya stepped forward with the fearless curiosity that had served her well throughout their journey, her dark eyes bright with wonder at seeing so many children who looked like her playing together without apparent conflict. "Are all these people really families?" she asked Rosa. "Different kinds of people living together like real families?" Rosa knelt to bring herself to Maya's eye level, her weathered face softening with genuine warmth. "Real families come in many forms, little one. Some are connected by blood, some by choice, some by shared struggle. Here in Esperanza Valley, we have learned that the strongest families are often those who choose each other when the world tells them they should not. The first weeks in Esperanza Valley revealed that building a multiracial community required more than good intentions and shared ideals. Despite the obvious success of the settlement, tensions existed beneath the surface, cultural misunderstandings that could flare into conflicts, economic disagreements about resource allocation, personality clashes amplified by the stress of trying to create something unprecedented in a hostile environment. Talon found himself caught between his natural inclination towards solitude and the community's expectation that everyone contribute to collective decision-making. The weekly council meetings, where all adults gathered to discuss issues affecting the settlement, challenged his Apache training that valued individual judgment over group consensus. When debates grew heated over water rights or grazing boundaries, his instinct was to withdraw rather than engage in the verbal conflicts that seemed to energize others. "Your silence speaks as loudly as other men's words," Rosa observed, after a particularly contentious meeting about defensive preparations. "But silence can be interpreted in many ways. Some hear wisdom, others hear judgment, still others hear disengagement. If you wish to be part of this community, you must help us understand which interpretation is correct." Elena faced different challenges as she attempted to establish her place in the settlement's informal economy. Her skills in traditional crafts, pottery, weaving, leatherworking, were valued and sought after, but the pricing and trading relationships that governed commerce in Esperanza Valley operated according to unwritten rules that differed significantly from the bartering systems she had known in Mexican trading communities. The Women's Council that supervised much of the settlement's domestic organization welcomed Elena's participation, but she struggled with the democratic processes that governed their decision-making. In her previous experience, older women held authority based on age and expertise, while younger women deferred to their judgment. Here, voices carried weight based on logic and persuasion rather than traditional hierarchies, creating confusion about how to express disagreement without giving offense. Maya's integration proved both easier and more complex than her parents had anticipated. Children accepted her presence without the suspicion that sometimes shadowed adult interactions, but they also expected her to understand games, songs, and social customs that she had never encountered. Her mixture of Apache, Mexican, and American cultural knowledge made her fascinating to other children, but also highlighted her status as someone who belonged fully to no single tradition. The school that operated in the settlement's largest building presented particular challenges. The teacher, a former university professor from back east, who had come west after losing his position due to radical political views, attempted to provide education that honored all the cultural traditions represented in his classroom. But textbooks written for white American children poorly served students whose heritage included Apache oral traditions, Mexican folk wisdom, and the practical knowledge that came from survival on the frontier. More troubling were the whispers that began circulating after their first month in the valley. Some residents questioned whether Talon could truly be trusted, given his reputation as a lone warrior who had lived outside both white and Apache society for years. Others wondered about Elena's past, speculating about the circumstances that had led to her capture and the experiences she had endured before Talon's rescue. A few expressed concern about Maya's mixed heritage, suggesting that children who belonged to multiple cultures might never develop the loyalty necessary for community survival. The fragile peace of Esperanza Valley was shattered on a crisp October morning when scouts brought word that a large armed force was approaching from the south. The riders carried no military banners, but their organization and equipment suggested either cavalry deserters or mercenaries in the pay of interests hostile to the settlement's existence. Leading them was a man whose description made Talon's blood run cold, Marcus Brennan, the trading post owner whose operation they had destroyed during Elena and Maya's rescue. "He's brought 40 men," reported Samuel Harrison, the former cavalry officer who served as the settlement's military coordinator. "Professional fighters, well-armed and well-supplied. They're making no attempt at concealment, which suggests they're confident about the outcome of any confrontation." The community meeting that followed revealed divisions that had remained hidden during peaceful times. Some residents argued for attempting negotiation, believing that reasonable people could find compromise solutions to most conflicts. Others insisted that the settlement's location should remain secret, that they should evacuate immediately rather than risk a battle that could destroy everything they had built. Talon stood to address the assembly, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced such decisions before. "This man Brennan is not reasonable, and he is not interested in compromise. He makes his living from human suffering, and he sees this community as a threat to his business. He has not come here to negotiate, he has come to destroy." Elena rose beside him, her hand resting on Maya's shoulder in a gesture that spoke of protective determination. "My daughter and I have already paid the price of believing that evil men might be satisfied with partial victories. They cannot be bargained with because their appetite for causing pain is never satisfied. They understand only strength, only the willingness to fight for what matters." The debate that followed revealed the fundamental tension between idealism and pragmatism that existed at the heart of Esperanza Valley's experiment. Many residents had come to the settlement specifically to escape the violence that dominated frontier life, to build something based on cooperation rather than conflict. The prospect of taking up arms to defend their community forced them to confront the possibility that their peaceful experiment might require violent means for its preservation. Rosa Delgado, whose authority in the community came from her combination of practical wisdom and moral clarity, finally silenced the debate with words that cut to the essential issue. We have built something beautiful here, something that proves different kinds of people can live together in harmony. But beauty that cannot defend itself is merely decoration for someone else's wall. If we will not fight for what we have created, then we never truly believed in it. The preparations that followed transformed the peaceful valley into a fortress designed according to principles that drew on every military tradition represented in the community. Apache knowledge of camouflage and ambush tactics combined with Mexican expertise in defensive architecture and Anglo engineering skills to create obstacles and fortifications that would channel attackers into predetermined killing zones. Talon found himself appointed as the settlement's war chief, a role that felt both natural and deeply uncomfortable. His reputation as a warrior who had survived 3 years alone in Apache country gave him credibility with fighters from all backgrounds. But accepting leadership required him to overcome years of conditioning that valued individual action over collective responsibility. The children, including Maya, were evacuated to caves in the high country where they would be safe regardless of the battle's outcome. Maya's goodbye to Talon and Elena carried the weight of someone who understood that this might be their final meeting. But her courage in the face of uncertainty demonstrated lessons learned from watching adults face impossible choices with dignity rather than despair. "Promise me you'll come back," Maya whispered as she hugged Talon goodbye. "Promise me our family won't end before it really had a chance to begin." Talon knelt to look directly into her dark eyes, seeing in them the reflection of everything worth protecting in the world. "I promise you that whatever happens, the love between us will continue. Families are not destroyed by death, they are only separated by distance. They can be crossed again." Brennan's assault began at dawn with the kind of frontal attack that suggested either supreme confidence or poor understanding of his opponent's capabilities. 40 mounted men charged across the valley floor toward fortifications that appeared hastily constructed and lightly defended, expecting to overwhelm a community of farmers and idealistic refugees who had never faced professional fighters. The first wave of attackers rode directly into carefully prepared ambush positions, where Apache warriors, using traditional tactics, worked alongside Mexican vaqueros, employing techniques learned in range wars, and Anglo settlers who had learned military discipline during the recent civil conflict. The result was devastation that stopped the charge before it reached the settlement's outer defenses. Talon commanded the battle from a position that allowed him to see the entire valley, while remaining close enough to the fighting to provide immediate tactical support where needed. His war paint, applied according to traditions his grandfather had taught him, marked him as someone who had accepted the possibility of death, while choosing to fight for something more important than personal survival. Elena participated in the battle despite having no formal military training. Her role involving coordination of ammunition resupply and medical support for wounded defenders. But when a group of attackers broke through the eastern defenses and threatened the evacuation routes to the high country, she took up weapons and fought with the fierce determination of a mother protecting her young. The turning point came when Brennan himself led a desperate charge against the settlement's central fortifications, apparently believing that capturing the community's leadership would force a surrender. Instead, he found himself facing not frightened civilians, but hardened fighters who had chosen to stake everything on defending their vision of what frontier life could become. Talon met Brennan in single combat that became the focus of the entire battle. Two men whose conflict represented larger questions about what kind of society would emerge from the chaos of westward expansion. Brennan fought with the brutal efficiency of someone who viewed violence as a tool for profit, while Talon carried weapons blessed by medicine men and sharpened by the knowledge that some causes justified any sacrifice. The duel ended when Talon's knife found the space between Brennan's ribs, but the victory carried no satisfaction beyond the knowledge that a source of evil had been removed from the world. As Brennan died, his eyes reflected not fear, but surprise. Surprise that his advantages in numbers and equipment had not been sufficient to defeat people fighting for something they valued more than their own lives. The surviving attackers fled after their leader's death, but the cost of victory became apparent as the community counted their losses. 7 defenders had died, including Rosa Delgado, whose leadership had been instrumental in creating the settlement's unique character. 14 others bore wounds that would affect them for the rest of their lives, and damage to buildings and crops would require months of additional labor to repair. But something else had emerged from the battle, a sense of shared identity that transcended the individual backgrounds that had originally brought people to Esperanza Valley. They had fought together, bled together, and proven to themselves that their experiment in multiracial cooperation was worth defending with their lives. The community that emerged from the battle was stronger than the one that had entered it. Maya's return from the evacuation caves brought tears to eyes that had remained dry throughout the fighting. Her reunion with Talon and Eleanor carried emotional weight that seemed to restore hope to a community that had paid a terrible price for the right to continue existing. As she ran between the 3 of them, hugging each in turn, other families began similar reunions that reminded everyone why they had chosen to fight. That evening, as the community gathered to honor their dead and tend their wounded, Talon stood before the assembly to speak words that would be remembered long after the battle itself became history. Today, we learned that some things are worth dying for because they are the only things worth living for. We did not fight to preserve buildings or defend territory. We fought to protect the idea that different kinds of people can choose to become family, that love is stronger than hate, that hope is more powerful than fear. Elena added her own voice to the ceremony, speaking for all the women who had seen their children evacuated and their men march into battle. Our community was born from the decision to choose each other when the world said we should not. Today, we proved that such choices, once made, create bonds that cannot be broken by force or fear. We are no longer separate peoples trying to live together. We are one people who happen to come from different places. As the stars emerged over Esperanza Valley, illuminating a community that had been tested by fire and found strong enough to endure, the survivors began the work of rebuilding not just their damaged structures, but their vision of what American society could become when people chose cooperation over conflict, when they decided that human dignity mattered more than human differences. The morning after the battle dawned, with a silence that felt different from the peaceful, quiet Esperanza Valley had known before. This was the silence of a community that had been tested by violence and emerged transformed, marked by loss, but strengthened by the knowledge that their bonds had proven unbreakable even under the most extreme pressure. Smoke still rose from the smoldering remains of buildings damaged in the fighting, but already the sound of hammers and saws announced that rebuilding had begun. The battlefield itself told a story of courage and sacrifice that would be remembered for generations. Blood-stained earth, where defenders had made their stand, was carefully tended by survivors who understood that this ground had become sacred, sanctified by the willingness of ordinary people to die for something greater than themselves. Weapons scattered during the fighting were collected not as trophies, but as relics of a day when the community's values had been tested and proven worthy of ultimate sacrifice. Maya walked through the settlement with the measured steps of someone far older than her 7 years, her small hands carrying water to wounded defenders, and her voice offering comfort to children whose parents bore fresh bandages. The battle had changed her too, stripping away the last vestiges of childhood innocence while revealing reserves of strength and compassion that would serve her throughout the remarkable life that lay ahead. Her transformation was evident in the way other children now looked to her for guidance and reassurance. Where once she had been simply another refugee child, learning to fit into an established community, She had become a bridge between the adult world of serious responsibilities and the child's world of hope and possibility. Her bilingual abilities allowed her to translate not just words, but emotions, helping frightened children understand that the violence was over and safety had been restored. Elena worked alongside the other women in what had become a field hospital, her hands steady as she cleaned wounds and changed dressings with skills learned from necessity rather than formal training. The experiences of captivity and survival had taught her to function under pressure, to find calm in the center of chaos, to provide strength for others even when her own heart carried the weight of recent loss. The makeshift medical facility revealed the community's remarkable ability to improvise solutions under desperate circumstances. Dining tables had been converted into surgical platforms. Kitchen knives had been sterilized and repurposed as medical instruments, and bed sheets had been torn into bandages that carried the scent of the homes where they had once provided comfort. Every improvisation told a story of people refusing to surrender hope despite overwhelming challenges. The death of Rosa Delgado had created a leadership vacuum that threatened to destabilize the community just when unity was most crucial. Rosa's wisdom and diplomatic skills had been essential in mediating conflicts between different cultural groups, and her loss left questions about who could fill such a crucial role. The council meetings that followed the battle were more contentious than usual, with grief and stress amplifying disagreements that might have been easily resolved under normal circumstances. Talon found himself reluctantly thrust into a leadership position that required skills he had never needed during his years of solitary survival. Warriors were trained to make quick decisions based on immediate tactical requirements, but community leaders needed to balance competing interests, build consensus among diverse viewpoints, and plan for long-term consequences that extended far beyond any single conflict. The responsibilities felt heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. The transition from war chief to civilian leader challenged every assumption Talon had about his own capabilities and limitations. In combat, success was measured by clear metrics: enemies defeated, objectives achieved, casualties minimized. But community leadership required subtler judgments about human nature, cultural sensitivity, and the delicate balance between individual rights and collective needs. He found himself spending hours in conversation with people whose perspectives differed radically from his own. The wounded defenders represented every cultural group in the settlement, creating bonds of shared sacrifice that transcended the ethnic divisions that had sometimes caused tension during peaceful times. Samuel Harrison, the former cavalry officer, lay in the same row of beds as Miguel Santos, the Mexican vaquero who had saved his life during the battle. Their conversations, conducted in a mixture of English and Spanish, with gestures filling the gaps, revealed common experiences of military service and shared values that went deeper than surface differences. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison worked tirelessly to save every life that could be saved. Her medical training stretched to its limits by wounds that ranged from simple cuts to devastating injuries that would have challenged surgeons in the finest Eastern hospitals. Her success rate was remarkable given the primitive conditions, but she could not save everyone, and each death weighed on her conscience despite the rational knowledge that she had done everything humanly possible. The burial ceremonies that followed combined traditions from all the cultures represented in Esperanza Valley, creating rituals that honored the dead while reinforcing the bonds among the living. Apache prayers for safe passage to the spirit world mingled with Catholic masses for the repose of souls and Protestant hymns that spoke of eternal rest. The graves were marked with symbols from different traditions, but they were dug side by side in soil that made no distinction between Apache earth and Mexican clay and Anglo dirt. The physical rebuilding of Esperanza Valley became a metaphor for the community's emotional and spiritual reconstruction. Every structure that had been damaged offered opportunities to improve on the original design, to incorporate lessons learned from the battle, and to create buildings that better reflected the multicultural character of the settlement. The new architecture that emerged was unlike anything seen elsewhere on the frontier. The planning process for reconstruction revealed the democratic spirit that had emerged from shared struggle. Instead of simply rebuilding what had been destroyed, the community engaged in extensive discussions about how structures could better serve their evolving needs. Town halls became forums for debate about everything from window placement to roof design, with every resident having input into decisions that would affect their daily lives for years to come. The central meeting hall that replaced Rosa's damaged home became a showcase for collaborative design principles. Apache post and beam construction techniques provided structural strength, while Mexican adobe walls offered thermal mass that would keep the interior cool during summer heat. Anglo innovations like glass windows and metal hardware were integrated with traditional decorative elements that honored all the cultural traditions represented in the community. Construction crews that worked on the meeting hall included members from every family in the settlement, creating work gangs that crossed cultural boundaries and fostered relationships that might never have developed under normal circumstances. Apache men who had never worked with tools beyond weapons and hunting implements learned carpentry skills from Anglo settlers, while Mexican artisans taught intricate stoneworking techniques to anyone willing to apprentice under their patient instruction. Maya played a crucial role in the reconstruction process, her small size allowing her to work in spaces where adults could not fit. Her artistic sensibilities helping to blend different decorative traditions into harmonious wholes. She painted designs that combined Apache geometric patterns with Mexican floral motifs and Anglo representational elements, creating visual narratives that told the story of how different peoples had come together to build something entirely new. Her artistic contributions went beyond simple decoration to become historical documents that captured the spirit of Esperanza Valley's experiment in multicultural cooperation. Future generations would study her paintings to understand how their ancestors had lived, what they had valued, and how they had successfully created unity from diversity. Her childhood artwork was already being recognized as historically significant by visitors who understood its documentary importance. The school building that rose from the ashes of the old structure embodied Professor Walsh's innovative educational philosophy in architectural form. Multiple entrances honored different cultural approaches to community gathering, while flexible interior spaces could be reconfigured for everything from large group lectures to small circle discussions. The walls were decorated with maps, artwork, and written materials that represented the knowledge traditions of Apache oral history, Mexican folk wisdom, and Anglo formal education. Elena emerged as an unexpected leader during the reconstruction phase, her artistic vision and practical skills making her invaluable in coordinating the complex logistics of rebuilding an entire community. She understood intuitively how to balance competing needs, how to allocate scarce resources fairly, and how to motivate people to work toward collective goals, even when individual desires might pull in different directions. Her leadership style drew on maternal instincts that had been sharpened by years of protecting Maya under impossible circumstances. She could be firm when necessary, gentle when appropriate, and always fair in ways that made people trust her judgment even when they disagreed with specific decisions. The respect she commanded came not from formal authority, but from demonstrated competence and genuine concern for community welfare. The economic system that evolved during Reconstruction reflected lessons learned from the battle about the importance of mutual dependence and collective security. Traditional Apache gift-giving ceremonies were expanded to include formal recognition of contributions from all cultural groups, while Mexican trading networks were adapted to ensure fair distribution of resources based on need rather than simply ability to pay. 6 months after the battle, Esperanza Valley celebrated its first major wedding ceremony, an event that would establish precedents for how the community honored love relationships that crossed cultural boundaries. John Patterson, a white settler from Ohio whose wife had died during the journey west, had fallen in love with Maria Gonzalez, a Mexican widow whose husband had been killed in revolutionary violence. Their decision to marry challenged conventional social boundaries, while affirming the community's commitment to judging relationships by their quality rather than their conformity to traditional expectations. The announcement of the engagement created excitement throughout the settlement, but it also raised questions about how to conduct a ceremony that would honor both partners' cultural traditions without favoring one over the other. Extended discussions in council meetings revealed the complexity of creating new traditions that respected old ones while meeting the needs of an unprecedented social situation. The wedding preparations became a community-wide celebration that showcased the artistic and cultural achievements of the previous months. Elena designed a dress that incorporated lace patterns from Mexican traditions with beadwork inspired by Apache ceremonial clothing and practical elements borrowed from Anglo-frontier fashion. The result was a garment that was both beautiful and symbolic, representing the successful blending of different aesthetic traditions. Working on the wedding dress became a collaborative project that involved women from throughout the community, each contributing skills learned from their own cultural backgrounds. The sewing circles that formed around this project created opportunities for informal cultural exchange, with techniques and stories being shared across ethnic boundaries in ways that strengthened understanding and friendship between different groups. Maya served as flower girl in a ceremony that included elements from Catholic, Protestant, and Apache wedding traditions. She scattered petals from desert flowers, while Apache singers performed blessing chants and a Mexican mariachi band played celebration music. The mixture of traditions created a festive atmosphere that felt both familiar and revolutionary, honoring the past while embracing innovative approaches to marking important life transitions. The role of flower girl required Maya to learn ceremony protocols from all three traditions, making her one of the first people in the community to master the cultural synthesis that was becoming Esperanza Valley's distinctive characteristic. Her ability to move seamlessly between different ritual requirements demonstrated the potential for future generations to be truly multicultural, rather than simply tolerant of diversity. Talon participated in the ceremony as an honored witness, his presence symbolizing the community's acceptance of relationships based on choice rather than tribal or racial affiliation. His blessing of the union carried special weight because of his status as someone who had proven his commitment to protecting families, regardless of their cultural composition. His words about the sacred nature of voluntary bonds resonated deeply with people who had all chosen to leave their birth communities in search of something better. The wedding feast that followed demonstrated the culinary achievements that had emerged from the community's multicultural character. Traditional Apache foods like agave heart and pine nut cake were served alongside Mexican dishes, including mole and tamales, and Anglo specialties like cornbread and apple pie. The combination created a dining experience that was unlike anything available in conventional frontier settlements. The preparation of the wedding feast required cooperation between cooks who had never worked together before, creating opportunities for culinary experimentation that produced entirely new dishes combining elements from different traditions. These fusion foods would eventually become signature elements of Esperanza Valley cuisine, attracting visitors from throughout the territory who came specifically to taste flavors that could not be found anywhere else. But the wedding's most significant impact was its effect on children in the community, who witnessed adults from different backgrounds celebrating love that transcended racial boundaries. Maya and her friends understood intuitively that they were growing up in a place where the rules that governed the outside world did not apply, where human worth was measured by character rather than ancestry, where the future held possibilities that their parents' generation could barely imagine. The dancing that concluded the wedding celebration became a joyous expression of cultural synthesis, with Apache traditional dances performed alongside Mexican folk dances and Anglo-social dances. Partners changed frequently, creating combinations that would have been scandalous in conventional society, but felt natural and celebratory in Esperanza Valley's accepting atmosphere. The music itself represented collaboration, with musicians from different traditions learning each other's songs and creating new compositions that drew on multiple cultural sources. 2 years after their arrival in Esperanza Valley, Talon, Elena, and Maya had become integral parts of a community that bore little resemblance to the settlement they had first encountered. The changes went far beyond simple growth in population or improvements in physical infrastructure. The community had developed a distinct culture that was recognizably American while incorporating elements from all the traditions that had contributed to its formation. The transformation was visible in every aspect of daily life, from the way people dressed to the way they spoke to the way they resolved conflicts. Children who had grown up in Esperanza Valley moved with confidence that came from knowing they belonged to something larger than any single ethnic group, while adults who had arrived as refugees from various forms of persecution now carried themselves with the dignity of full participants in a society that valued their contributions. Maya, now 9 years old, had emerged as a natural leader among the settlement's children, her multilingual abilities and multicultural knowledge making her invaluable as a translator and mediator when misunderstandings arose between families from different backgrounds. Her intelligence and charisma suggested that she would play important roles in the community's future development, possibly becoming one of the first generation of leaders who had no memory of the ethnic conflicts that still plagued the outside world. Her education had progressed far beyond what would have been available to a girl of her background in conventional society. Professor Walsh's innovative teaching methods had allowed her to master academic subjects while also learning practical skills from community members who shared traditional knowledge passed down through generations. She could read and write in 3 languages, perform mathematical calculations necessary for trade and construction, and demonstrate artistic techniques that drew on multiple cultural traditions. Elena's artistic work had evolved into a profitable business that attracted customers from throughout the territory, with traders traveling hundreds of miles to purchase pottery, textiles, and leather goods that represented unique syntheses of different cultural traditions. Her success demonstrated that Esperanza Valley's multicultural approach could generate economic benefits as well as social harmony, creating products that appealed to diverse markets precisely because they transcended conventional ethnic categories. The reputation of Elena's artistic work had spread far beyond the immediate region, with examples of her pottery and textiles being carried by traders to markets in Santa Fe, Tucson, and even distant California. Museums and private collectors were beginning to recognize the historical significance of artifacts that documented successful cultural synthesis during a period when most frontier communities were characterized by conflict and segregation. Talon's transformation from solitary warrior to community leader represented one of the most remarkable personal changes that had occurred during Esperanza Valley's development. His marriage to Elena had been followed by formal adoption of Maya, creating a legal family structure that honored their emotional bonds while providing security that could survive challenges from outside authorities who might question unconventional arrangements. The adoption ceremony itself had become another precedent-setting event that demonstrated Esperanza Valley's commitment to expanding definitions of family beyond biological relationships. Apache traditions that emphasize spiritual kinship, combined with Mexican practices that honored chosen family relationships, and Anglo-legal frameworks that provided formal recognition of parental responsibilities. The result was a procedure that felt both ancient and innovative. His role as a regional diplomatic figure had grown naturally from his reputation as someone who could bridge cultural differences while maintaining respect from all parties involved in conflicts. Territorial officials increasingly called on him to mediate disputes between different ethnic groups. Recognizing that his unique background and demonstrated commitment to fairness made him invaluable for preventing conflicts from escalating into violence. Professor Walsh's educational innovations had attracted attention from reformers throughout the country who were seeking alternatives to conventional schooling that ignored the cultural heritage of non-Anglo students. His methods, which integrated academic subjects with practical skills and honored multiple knowledge traditions simultaneously, were being studied by educators who recognized that America's future would require citizens capable of functioning in multicultural environments. The correspondence that Elena maintained with other Mexican communities had created trade networks that benefited everyone involved. While Talon's connections with Apache bands provided intelligence about regional developments that helped territorial authorities prevent conflicts before they escalated into violence. These relationships demonstrated that Esperanza Valley's residents had not abandoned their cultural identities, but had found ways to honor their heritage while building something new. As the sun set on another peaceful day in Esperanza Valley, Talon stood with Elena and Maya on the porch of their adobe home, watching children from a dozen different backgrounds playing together in the golden light of desert evening. The games they played incorporated elements from all their cultural traditions, creating new forms of entertainment that would be passed down to future generations as distinctly Esperanza Valley customs. The view from their porch encompassed the entire valley, revealing a landscape that had been transformed by human cooperation rather than conquered by force. Gardens bloomed with plants from multiple continents. Buildings reflected architectural wisdom from different cultures, and paths worn by countless feet connected households that represented the successful realization of America's democratic ideals. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't found each other? Elena asked, her hand resting comfortably in Talon's calloused palm. I try not to, Talon replied, his other arm encircling Maya's shoulders as she leaned against him. Some possibilities are too terrible to contemplate, and others are too wonderful to believe unless you're living them. Maya looked up at the two people who had chosen to become her parents, then out at the community that had chosen to become her extended family. I don't wonder about what might have been, she said, with the wisdom of someone who had learned early that the present moment contained all the happiness anyone could reasonably expect. I just know that we're together now, and that's all that matters. As darkness fell over Esperanza Valley, lanterns began glowing in windows throughout the settlement, each light representing a family that had been formed by choice rather than chance, a household that honored multiple traditions while creating something entirely new. The community that had emerged from the decision of one Apache warrior to save two strangers had become proof that the American frontier could nurture cooperation as well as conflict, that the future belonged to those who chose love over fear, hope over despair, family over isolation. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the desert, their voices carrying news that would spread throughout the territory and beyond. Somewhere in Arizona, there was a place where different kinds of people had learned to live together in peace, where children grew up believing that human worth was measured by character rather than ancestry, where the experiment in democracy that was America had found one of its truest expressions in the daily choices of ordinary people who had decided to build something better than what they had inherited. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.